Good afternoon and welcome to BNE Enterprise's lunchtime webinar series for November. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. We pay our respects to the Turrbal and Jagera people and their elders past, present and future. Business in Queensland have been grappling with the effects of this COVID pandemic for the past 9 months, finding innovative solutions to the many challenges we've faced and continuing to stay viable under trying circumstances. As we look into the future, 2021 will carry with it a new set of challenges as we transition into a post-COVID world. Our ability to operate freely without restriction will slowly come into effect, with travel routes opening up domestically and offices and work sites once again being the primary location for doing business, albeit at a safe distance. At BNE Enterprise, we've heard from many of our members, as well as from our industry peers, of the tremendous financial and advisory support they've received from local, state and federal governments. From Brisbane City Council's new business hub in Brisbane CBD, the state government's grant and loan schemes, to the federal government's JobKeeper, JobSeeker and taxation relief, this business life support has been critical to the ongoing survival of our economy. The Australian federal government's recent launch of the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencements and JobMaker initiatives are the next great step in supporting Australian businesses and, most importantly, providing employment and training opportunities for the thousands of young Australians actively seeking opportunities to rejoin the workforce, upgrade their skill sets and make a valuable contribution to the nation's economy. And that's why this month we've invited 4 of Queensland's leading experts in the apprenticeships and training space to join us to discuss post-COVID cost-effective employee solutions. We're here to offer our webinar viewers a perspective from industry stakeholders that day in, day out, create employment pathways for young Queenslanders seeking opportunity to build a career, as well as guiding employers through the often complex task of onboarding new apprentices and trainees. Most importantly, we're here to discuss the incredible incentives on offer to employers who choose to take on a new apprentice or trainee, or transition existing employees from casual to part-time or full-time work. Today we have Aviation Australia's Technical Assessment Officers, David Moffat and Russell Quinn, Brown's Professional Managing Director and Founder, Richard Brown, and Steve Wyborn Consulting Director, Steve Wyborn. An afternoon and a welcome to all of you, and thanks for taking the time to share your insights with us today. Before we get started, I'll take our guests through some housekeeping. Today is a 1-hour open Q&A session. We invite our webinar viewers to ask questions, and I'll endeavour to ask your guests your question as we proceed. Any questions we can't get to during the initial session, we hope to ask at the end during our open discussion. Today, we're going to start with Steve Wyborn from Steve Wyborn Consulting, and it's a good afternoon to you, Steve.
Many years ago, and understood that the opportunity for the industry was around developing a workforce that wanted to stay in the industry and thrive in the industry, and that's how I got into training many years ago. I've been involved in contracted employment and apprenticeship services since 1998. So lots of grey hair, mate. So that's come from that experience in managing government contracts and making sure that employers get the access to the funding and support that is available to them. Yeah.
And how have you been helping clients over the last 9 months to adapt to the new COVID workforce environment?
Doug, it's a really interesting environment, isn't it? We had before COVID almost 5% unemployment. In fact, you would say that we're almost at full employment in Australia. It was very difficult to find staff, and now we've moved to 7% unemployment. The real unemployment rate's sitting much higher than that, of course. So working with the customers to understand not only the changing nature of the workforce and how to attract the right people into their businesses as they reopen, but more importantly, understanding how businesses can engage with the incentives and programs that are being offered by the various departments of government. One of the things I understand about business is the people viewing today are experts in their own trade, the experts are in their own space, and they're busy getting on with the job of doing business. My role is to work with organisations to help them not only understand what these incentives mean, but help them to operationalise those incentives so that they can identify where they're eligible and how that might impact on their particular business.
What do you see as the main challenges facing business at the moment engaging with their employees?
Look, I think there's a couple of things that, that are really going to be quite interesting for businesses as we move forward. I've heard many employers talk about the fact that they've lost great staff through JobKeeper and you know, a little bit of uncertainty in the space that they're in and choosing other careers and those types of things. So, you know, people that you've had with you for a long time aren't there anymore. So onboarding new staff and giving them the skills and building productivity as quickly as possible, I think that's going to be something that's important. I think that there'll be a competitive nature about how we onboard new staff in the future. I think working with employers so that they can be that employer of choice in the marketplace. And look, I'm a fan of the apprenticeship and traineeship system. So helping them to employers to understand there's 600 more than 600 different qualifications around there. There really is a qualification to suit most businesses, and there's a real benefit in employers not only offering somebody a job, but offering them skills and the national qualification that comes with that job. And that really gives them not only more security in the job, but more security in the industry.
Fantastic. And tell us about the new federal government subsidies on offer to employers. Like I guess it's a little bit confusing at times as an employer who hasn't traditionally engaged with government and bringing on, you know, apprentices and trainees. Just, I guess, give us a bit of an explanation of what these federal government subsidies are.
Oh, they're unbelievable. And I think that's, you know, so often when I'm talking to employers, they go, hang on, what's the catch? Because we've not seen this, right? We've not seen this level of investment in business and support for business ever, certainly in my grey-haired history. So I think there's so many different opportunities, and coming to terms with the right one for your business is critical. $1.2 billion put into the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencements is really important. And so often, again, I'll talk to employers and they'll think, oh, well, I don't employ tradespeople, so that doesn't apply to my business. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The fact is that any business can employ an apprentice or a trainee in their business. It might be in business administration. It might be in leadership and management. If you're bringing on somebody in a supervisory or management role that doesn't have a formal qualification, you know, Richard and his team at Browns are doing some great work in promoting and training people up in leadership and management. So we can think a little bit outside of the box in terms of eligibility to access that $1.2 billion worth of funds. Now that's on top of about another $1.2 billion worth of funding that's available under the Job Trainer Initiative, which is a you know, dollar for dollar contribution to the state government. So that you know, $7,000 a quarter that we see out of the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement funding is only the tip of the iceberg as to what's coming down the barrel to support businesses to recruit and train staff the way they want it. And I think the other one, which I love, is the JobMaker hiring credits. They're, you know, $200 a month for up to 35s and over. I think that's right. Just make sure I've got it there. Up to 29s, 16 to 29, $200 a week, and $100 a week for people 29 to 35. That's a great initiative to help employers have the confidence to bring somebody back into their business. You might be sitting there thinking, oh, geez, you know, we're on that cusp. Do I hire somebody? Don't I? And knowing that there's that credit there available to you to give you that confidence to move forward and make that decision, it's smart policy. It really is.
And that's for a person, obviously, who's coming off a job seeker program. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, look, there's as always, there's a little bit of eligibility around that, and it is absolutely aimed at somebody that's currently in receipt of benefits. They're in receipt of job seeker and or youth allowance, those types of benefits, and they're pretty easy to find out. You can certainly ask the ask the individual whether they're in receipt of benefits, but I'd also really encourage people to be working back through organisations like an apprenticeship support network provider or a job active provider. To find the right person and make sure that they're eligible to attract some of these incentives.
And I guess that's the main difference between the JobMaker program and the Boosting Apprenticeships. It's really I guess the status of the individual prior to them being engaged is really what's dependent on the type of incentive that they're being offered.
Yeah, look, that's right. Absolutely anybody coming into your business, will be eligible for that Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement funding, as long as they're new. You can employ some existing workers. So if you've got somebody in your business that's working casually at the moment and you convert them to a part-time or a part-timer into a full-time role, so basically elevate their standing in the workplace, then they'll be eligible up to a maximum of 30 of your existing workers to attract that funding. And that's $7,000 a quarter, 50% of their wage up to $7,000 a quarter. That's just remarkable and a fantastic opportunity for employers. The other thing too is to remember that it doesn't necessarily mean sending that person away for weeks on end for training. Most of the training providers and again, Richard from the Browns team, they deliver that training out there on the job, and they working with employers too, to make sure that the training that the new entrant or the existing worker is getting in their business relates completely to the workforce. It's not about, I used to talk to plasterers about they'd go out and off to TAFE and learn how to do wet plastering and build cornices and stuff like that. And then the apprentice would pop into Bunnings and buy some. They're relevant skills, and they're directly tailored to the workplace.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the great fears for employers, that sort of still think of apprenticeships and traineeships in that traditional mindset, where they're concerned that an apprentice or trainee is going to be away for weeks on end, and therefore they're going to be a burden to the business, over that duration of their qualification. And the new environment for apprenticeships and traineeships couldn't be anything further from that, that former context, I suppose.
Look, absolutely. There is a requirement for employers to make a little bit of time in each week just for the apprentice to do or trainee to do some of their work. But a lot of that will be online. But the great RTOs are working with the employers and saying, what are the skill sets in your business, and how do we relate the training we deliver to what you deliver every day? It's got to be relevant. If it's relevant, people connect with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, does it matter the type of course being undertaken? I've got a question here from an attendee, just quickly. It doesn't matter the type of course that's been undertaken. Is there a certain, qualification type that people need to sort of seek out?
No, in fact, again, one of the wonderful things about this Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement, or the back funding, is that it really is available for anything from a Certificate 2 program right through to advanced diplomas. So there's an enormous range of qualifications that are available for people to access. Some of those will attract additional funding from the Queensland state government, so others won't. So I guess if those programs, for example, if we looked at a diploma in leadership and management, it might not attract additional funding from the state government. So there'd be a contribution from the employer towards that training. But again, if you think about the fact that there's up to $28,000 worth of incentives coming down the barrel to offset some of that with a few, bit of a training fee's not too bad. Right. And I've got to say, Doug, look, as I said, I've been doing this for 100 years, and it's been $4,000 for an employer, $1,500 at the front and $2,500 when they finish, for as long as I can remember. To boost that up to $28,000 is quite remarkable. And in some cases, you're still eligible for the $4,000. So it's right.
So when I first saw it, I thought this is one of Australia's best kept secrets. I think it's important that we let our members and their associates know about this, because it truly is a fantastic incentive for our members to take on. Now, look, obviously, can an employer access more than one form of Australian government funding under these initiatives? Like, how does that work? If they're currently on one particular type of, government program or, subsidy, can they easily transition across to a new one? Look,
essentially the answer is no. The government's obviously very mindful of double dipping, if you like, and accessing a couple of different. So, for example, if somebody's in receipt of JobKeeper or the hiring credits, then they're not eligible for the back funding, and vice versa. But there is still eligibility for different levels of state government funding that comes in as well. As I said, under the Skills Assured program here in Queensland, many of the apprentices will be eligible to attract, user choice funding to support their training from the state government. So no double dipping in terms of the the federal government programs, but aligning it to state government programs is something we work with a heck of a lot of employers to maximise the opportunity.
So can employers get, I guess, can they get, you know, money up front to help support wages in those first few months when they bring on a new employee?
The programs are paid in arrears, and I guess that's for a really good reason. It's just about making sure that what's being paid is what's being delivered, and you know, so there's things like payroll evidence. The JobMaker hiring credits are back through the ATO, so they are in arrears. But look, my experience, we've had the supporting apprentices and trainees program. That was one of the first initiatives that was announced by the government when COVID first kicked off, and I know that you know, a couple of teething issues in the beginning, but now the turnaround on those payments is very, very quick by the providers, and they're getting people back their money back pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I guess similar to the JobKeeper program, if an employer is already utilising that JobKeeper subsidy, it's pretty easy for them to sort of get their head around exactly what this Boosting Apprenticeship scheme is all about then.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's plenty of people around that, you know, we'll send some you know, some fact sheets across to you so we can, you know, we can make that available. But there's plenty of organisations around, and we can hook people up with the right organisation to talk them through that, and I guess that's my role.
And how long are these subsidies available for?
They vary. So the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement one, that's a really interesting one. It's 100,000 places available. And it runs out in September. It's a bit of I call it the law of diminishing return. The longer you wait, the less the funding is, because it does sort of finish in September, where the hiring credits is for the 12-month period. There's 25, as I said, 100,000 places available for the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencements. The last time I had a look at the figures, which was yesterday, about 26,000 of those have been used. So whilst I wouldn't say to people make rash hiring decisions to put people on, I would be mindful of getting the information as quickly as possible and making those decisions to make sure you're in that 100,000.
It's amazing, actually. I mean, there's, you know, we're roughly 75,000 places still left, so there's ample opportunity and ample time. Yeah,
it's going to be great, isn't it, for these school leavers? As soon as they get back from Noosa, we can get them into an apprenticeship.
Why not? If they survive, from what I've seen from the news coverage of Noosa in the last day,
we have to give them a couple of days to get over the food.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much for that, Steve. I'll now introduce everyone to Richard Brown, founder and managing director of Brown's Professional. I personally am familiar, obviously, with Brown's, understanding the English language education component of what you know, people might be familiar with Brown's. But if I could ask Richard just to give us a bit of an understanding of Brown's Professional and what's been happening over the last year with the Brown's organisation. Welcome to you, Richard.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks everyone from BNE Enterprise for joining the webinar today. So yes, Brown's English School, Brown's Professional, we're a dual sector provider. So I started the business 18 years ago. We're multi-sites across Brisbane and Gold Coast. We look after a range of students from more than 50 different nationalities. So a lot of those students are coming through, obviously, the Brisbane airport. They're visiting family, friends and relatives. So the international sector has been well publicised as being a $40 billion sector, and that's been greatly affected by COVID. We also work in the domestic space too, so particularly looking after people looking to go on to upskilling or retraining in the Gold Coast community and the Brisbane community. So we've worked for a long time in supporting businesses and supporting their staff, ensuring their productivity and also professional development of people in the workplace. So from the the last 12 months has been obviously quite a lot of changes, but it's been definitely a challenging time. Yeah, very much looking forward to Christmas, I'm sure, like a lot of people.
Absolutely, as we were discussing earlier. Richard, tell us a little bit about the types of courses that Brown's Professional makes available to Queenslanders who are interested in furthering their skills in the workplace.
Sure. So we provide in the vocational division of our business, we provide certificates and diplomas in business. So Certificate 3, Certificate 4 and Diploma of Business. And the great thing about the courses we provide, students, when they study them, they can go on to then get credit exemptions at universities. So we work in partnerships with Central Queensland University, Griffith University, Torrens, Bond University, a lot of local higher education providers. And I think that's one of the big attractive selling points for students to come through our institution, is that they can get those credit exemptions, because whilst they might look at doing a few units of CompC or doing a course, it's about then potentially looking at the further study options, and then they can get credit into the second year, depending on the institution, depending on what they study. So the business areas is where we focus, and we're just looking at how we can support. We meet with the employers and the HR managers to find out what skill sets, where there's gaps, and where we can support their business be more productive, and where we can ensure that we can have their team more high performing. And of course, it's about then those contributions and how they make the business more successful.
What are some of the questions that you're getting from employers in terms of over the last 3 months? Like, have there been some really sticking questions that employers have been bringing forward to you, in terms of the concerns they have over the next 6 to 12 months? Or
Well, I think it depends on the organisation. So sometimes they're a casualised workforce, and there's a bit of, there's a lot of uncertainty out there. But depending on the industry and the sector, we're actually seeing a lot of growth in businesses. And one of the biggest challenges actually we're finding is some of the companies can't find the staff, because a lot of the international students that come into Australia, they actually fill some of those gaps where traditionally a lot of Australians are less likely to take up, and that's particularly in some of the regional areas. But on the Gold Coast and in Brisbane, we're finding employers are starting to, there's a bit more confidence, and the sentiment is that next year, particularly with some of the headlines at the moment about vaccinations, I think there's a lot more belief that next year may not be as bad as people first anticipated. So we're looking at how we can then support those businesses, not just from an upskilling perspective, but also providing them with talent. So we're utilising our networks, and they're quite broad with the range of different industries we work with, because international, particularly education, it expands across the aviation sectors, the tourism, and expands across construction, building, because you get a lot of the visiting family, friends and relatives coming here. And so people believe that and then it will come back to also the migration play and what decision the government decides to make with kickstarting the economy, with what kind of migration or immigration policies they outline in the coming months. So yeah, there is definitely a lot of companies are, as Steve mentioned, a bit overwhelmed with all the bit of information overload with all these incentives at the moment, and it's just about just breaking it down, meeting with employers and saying, well, how can this incentive benefit your organisation?
you mentioned the closing of the borders, not just internationally, obviously, Richard, but domestically. And fingers crossed we get a positive announcement from the state government in the coming days about opening up the domestic borders, at least to New South Wales and Victoria, over the next few weeks. I guess, with those impacts that have been sort of not necessarily forced upon business, but that they've just simply had to adapt to. How's your business adapted over the last few months? Has there been a real migration or shift into the technology environment? Digital transitioning for the Browns business at all?
Yeah, well, a lot of our students traditionally have been face-to-face, but we've got in-house team to develop systems that allow our learners to continue their studies online. For a lot of registered training organisations, they've had to close their campuses. So then the businesses have had to look at how they can continue the studies with the students online, and some self-paced, but supporting. I think the biggest challenge was supporting the digital literacy, and allowing particularly employers and also parents to support their children or support their staff with their studies and their engagement levels. So it's about those regular feedback loops and continuing to be close, those close connectivity with the learner. So regularly engaging with them, how you're going, how you're progressing, because it's really hard to make that transition from a lot of learners who have gone traditionally face-to-face to 100% online. But it's been surprising how quickly people and how capable we all are to adapt to this technological change that's been forced upon us.
Absolutely. I think we need to remember that, not all of your students are born digital ready. There are still quite a few people out there in the marketplace who have to, learn these new digital tools and integrate them within their everyday life and their work life. So yeah, it's an interesting transition, I would say. And have your clients sought to take full advantage of the current federal government incentives? Like, has there been quite a number coming to you and asking you to, source appropriate employees or potential employees to bring on board?
Initially, when we actually on budget night on the 5th of October, when they announced it, I think for a lot of people, when they announced the apprenticeships and traineeships, some you made the assumption, and many about that wouldn't include white collar jobs, and it would just be more for the traditional building, construction, and trades. And the exciting news is now it doesn't, and it has always, but it's just about explaining some of the language. I think it's around the interpretation and also helping employers and employees understand how they can access this funding, because as Steve commented, traditionally it hasn't included a lot of other industries, but this is it doesn't discriminate on industry. It's inclusive, and it's about the job creation and supporting jobs, keeping people in the workplace, whether they be transitioning from a casual to a permanent contract, or whether they be bringing on new staff in the last 3 months, or if it's a part-time arrangement in the last 12 months. So it's about translating it to them, to the employer, to say, well, this is how you can benefit. But I think for a lot of employers, they're initially overwhelmed again with that information, but they're also a little bit skeptical, because it's so good and it's so supportive of businesses, particularly some companies that haven't been on JobKeeper or had staff on JobKeeper, or companies coming off JobKeeper, and then looking at, okay, well, what can we do with any new staff? Because as it was mentioned, you can't double dip, but for JobKeeper 3.0, I think it's around $500 a week. This support is actually more than that weekly compensation, and you're upskilling people, so you're supporting your staff, and the continuation till the end of September, whereas JobKeeper expires at the end of March. Yep. So yeah, it's just helping people understand this is real, this is here for you, and helping them understand about how they can access this fantastic incentive.
So you're really maximising the potential, I suppose, for the Boosting Apprenticeship program for students and your clients to, I guess, meet in the middle and determine a fit for purpose solution for not just the employer, but also for the student or potential employee as well.
Yeah, so it's a bespoke, personalised approach that we take. So we go and meet with the employer, find out if this is something that they are eligible for, because I think that's the first step, and then B, then doing, helping support employers find out where their skills gaps are, particularly with their existing team, but also for any new recruits, and then helping them access again this opportunity. So we'll make sure that we're minimal disruption to organisations too, because I think that's something they often get concerned about is, well, if they're upskilling, how many hours off the tools or how many hours off the job is this going to be? So we estimate it's less than a couple of hours per week, but what we try and do is make sure that we work with the employer, with the manager, that particularly with new staff joining or existing staff, that they are taking on board the policies that a company has on place, and working with the employer to build those skill sets from ground up.
Fantastic. I mean, it's funny, obviously, BNE Enterprise has quite a number of stakeholders within the aviation environment, and I'm about to introduce everyone to David and Russell at the moment, but, one of the key areas, I suppose, of concentration over the last sort of 6 months has been working out ways in which people who are existing within the aviation industry can find ways in which to upskill themselves to, I guess, and adapt to make themselves more meaningful within the workplace and more attractive to employers to keep on and help their businesses grow. And on that point, Richard, very much appreciate your inputs today. Thank you very much for coming along. And I'll now introduce our guests to David Moffat and Russell Quinn from Aviation Australia. Both technical assessment officers, have many years experience working with Aviation Australia and with students both domestically and abroad. A welcome to you, David and Russell, if you wouldn't mind giving us a bit of a rundown of your day-to-day, what you guys do for a living.
Good afternoon, Doug. Yeah, sure. So, look, once an organisation signs up an apprentice through the Apprentice Support Network, they'll then nominate a supervising RTO to deliver the training and assessment requirements. So that's where Dave and I come in. We're responsible for fulfilling the assessment obligations of the SRTO, obviously Aviation Australia in this case. So how do we do that? We do that by visiting our apprentices on site, assessing their journal entries, which is effectively where they record the work they've done in the day-to-day work environment. And we're assessing that against the competencies of the qualification that they're undertaking. So for us, we have about 420 apprentices Australia-wide. About 200 of those we look after from the Brisbane office.
Australia-wide, 420 apprentices. That's quite a lot to manage.
Yeah, so for an SRTO, there's quite a lot. So obviously we don't look after the whole country. We've got organisations in WA and Victoria and the Northern Territory and Cairns. Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely a good number of apprentices.
Absolutely. David, who are some of the clients you work with in the aviation industry, and what are the types of services they're seeking from Aviation Australia?
Yeah, Doug, we service the entire industry, basically, and essentially if you want to sort of put them into three main groups, you've got the commercial aviation, your sort of airline end of town, you got defence contractors, and then general aviation, which is everything else. In each of these groups, both dealing with both fixed and rotary wing. So it's quite a large industry sort of spread across. We equally have clients in all of these groups. As for services, we've got a range of services, but predominantly we're in the market to provide the aviation industry with engineers. We provide all aspects of training, both theory and practical, on site. We've got on-site liaison officers that sort of link the gap between employers and employees, so that sort of services that the industry sort of seek. We then provide SRTO, as Russ said, we provide SRTO management throughout the apprenticeship or traineeship until completion. So
that's SRTO, that's Supervising Registered Training Organisation.
That's correct, sorry.
Yeah, yep, okay. Has the way you assisted these clients changed since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. And as Russ sort of alluded to, a lot of our work is out in the field. It's on site. It's face to face. It's looking at journals. So initially, it was quite a lot of changes. You know, when the full restrictions came in, we were sort of set to pretty well work from home almost. So everything that was face to face, on site, in the field, customer liaison, basically, unfortunately, could be replaced by online methods and sort of into the digital world. Yep. Obviously not quite as productive, a little bit slower, but still perform the job that we need to do.
Yep. It's quite amazing given, the practical nature of so many of the engineering components of the courses that you've got on offer. It's quite an incredible achievement by the team at Aviation Australia. Russell, do you think the COVID-19 crisis had any impact on how employers view the apprentice program?
Yeah, so from our perspective, and I think you touched on it a bit earlier there, Doug, the media's, it's pretty hard to avoid it. The media's pretty much reported that aviation sector has been very heavily impacted by COVID-19. And that to a degree has been reflected in some of the commercial operators with reduced apprentice workloads. That being said, though, we have noticed that general aviation and defence contractors that support defence both have been busier than ever. Our apprentice enrolments this year are basically higher than the previous 4 years. Potentially, that could be general aviation picking up part of the void left behind by commercial, especially around the mid-range sector. Or it could be that organisations that have been sitting on the fence taking the opportunity to take an apprentice while there's additional support around. With Victoria and New South Wales opening borders and the rest of the states likely to follow, no doubt we'll see the workload increase for those commercial operators that we work with.
Sure. And David, what do you think is the industry level of knowledge on the apprentice incentives? Is there a great level of awareness amongst the sector, or?
Doug, look, from our experience out in the field, we were just discussing this earlier, like to be absolutely honest, there's actually a very low level of understanding of these incentives, and to everyone's defence, these have been new incentives. They're evolved quickly as well. Like I think they have changed over time quickly. I think the boost is only sort of 2 to 3 weeks old, essentially, or since the last amendment. So I definitely think there's room for improving awareness. Yeah, so I definitely think there needs to be some more drive behind the information to it, because I mean, there's businesses there that are, they've always said, well, we'd love to take on an apprentice, but yeah, just can't afford it, too hard, and I mean, if they had a little bit more awareness of these incentives, I think they'd snavel it. I mean, we've seen businesses come out of the woodworks that they've never had an apprentice. And have got a hold of this information, luckily, and next thing you know, they're employing apprentices and putting people on. So it's, I definitely think there needs to be more drive behind it. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's I guess it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's no real single source where people can refer to for all of the amazing support that governments on all levels are providing employers currently. Right. As I mentioned earlier, it's an information minefield oftentimes, and employers can be a little bit numb to it at times, and I think there probably does need to be a little bit more of an effort on everyone's part to push the message out there and ensure that young Australians and young Queenslanders can actively seek opportunities to take up these offers, and equally employers who can receive some amazing financial incentives from government. So look, thanks very much to you both, David and Russell. I just now want to open up the floor for all of our special guests this afternoon, and just talk about some of the practicalities around the how-to of JobMaker and Boosting Apprenticeships Commencement programs. To all of our guests this afternoon, what do you think are the first steps a business should take when considering if they're likely to benefit from these programs?
Doug, I'll get started. As I said, we'll send through some frequently asked questions and a bit of a quick user guide. And I think one of the things that is really important is just do that first assessment of your own business and make sure that it's the type of thing that you think will apply. But there's no such thing as a silly question, right? So we can always we're happy to take those calls. We're happy to walk employers through it. I think the boys said at the end there. There's a low level of knowledge about that, and that's because people are busy doing what they're doing. They're busy running their business, and there's so much information about. It's a long answer to your question. Get in contact with your local apprenticeship network provider. They're the experts on the boosting apprenticeship and commencement stuff. But also again engaging with your job active providers and those organisations to make sure that the people you're bringing on board are eligible to attract those funds for you.
Right. Good answer, Steve. Is there a streamlined way in which a business can source eligible potential employees? Is there an easy way to go about this whole process if an employer is interested?
Yeah, look, again, I don't want to sort of take the floor here, so I'll pass it on. I work with an organisation called Mas National that work across the country as a network provider, and part of their gateway service is to work with schools to identify kids coming through to be able to take up these roles, and also working with job active providers to identify opportunities. So by connecting with somebody like Mas National is a great opportunity to get an expert that you can call on. They're your partners in the background to make sure that you've got the right information at hand, and they can walk you through everything from helping you find the apprentice in the first place. They own a school out at Scarborough there that does the traditional trade training out at Scarborough. So they've got all these kids coming through that have got partial skills. And they'll connect employers up with those kids. They'll help you sign the paperwork, and then they'll manage the incentives as you go through.
I think it's also important to know that it's not a complicated process. It's quite an easy process. There's really good infrastructure in place, particularly with the support networks and organisations, whether they be registered training organisations working in collaboration with the support networks, can come to the employers, meet them on site, and within about an hour we can assess the situation and then look at who would qualify, whether it be existing or potentially new staff. Because what we're finding is we're getting a lot of activity with people who are advertising for new roles. So it's finding the person, and then also it's quite attractive when you're bringing on any new candidates that you can offer them to a course of upskilling in a field that will be complementary to the role that they're taking on. So it's a simple process, and it's well supported. So I think for a lot of employers, I think they've been quite cautious because they don't want more workloads, because for some of them they've been consolidating their businesses, and now everyone's with the vaccine coming through and looking at, okay, what's the recovery look like? And now I need to put on new staff, particularly interstate borders opening, and my business is getting busier. Now I need to look at, right, I need to upskill these people to make them and the business high performing.
Yeah, no, I guess that comes down to, for yourself, Richard, and to David and Russell also, you're working with the business and the potential employees to ensure their partnership is the ideal fit, that it's fit for purpose throughout the duration of whatever the course they're undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely, Doug. We've got, I'm sure some RTOs also have the similar setup. We've got an employment services area where employers will come to us and ask about potential apprentices, those that might be currently doing courses with us. And then absolutely, once they're into the apprenticeship, we'll provide that support throughout the apprenticeship as well. So we follow through on that. So yeah, it's certainly available. And as we've just said before, Richard said, it's quite streamlined. Once you actually get into it, it's not overly complicated at all.
Fantastic. And I guess, sorry, Steve.
Sorry, mate. Just sorry to interrupt you, but just to say also that the services, it doesn't cost organisations to access these services. The RTOs, I know Richard and his team there will come out and do that assessment in the workplace, as do the organisation, some of the other organisations that work for. So it's not like you're going to pick up the phone and be hit with a $500 consulting bill. These are free support services that are available.
Any employer's greatest fear, consulting fees sometimes, isn't it? So, on that note, what's the application process like? Like, is this something that, people can easily refer to, as you mentioned earlier, Steve, a Q&A, or beg your pardon, an FAQ? Is it a really sort of simplified process for people to undertake from here on in, so they can find out more information?
Absolutely, it really is. It's a very once we've got some details, and I know you'll have some contact details at the end for each of the organisations. Doug, get in contact with us. Let us know what the questions are, and we'll just make sure that we get you onto the right person that can really guide you through. Whether it's one of our own organisations, we don't represent all of the 600 different qualifications that are available, but obviously if it's in the aviation space, we work with the guys at AA, but also at Aviation Australia, but also Browns and others. So it's a matter of picking up the phone and making the call or sending the email, and it's our job to get you on that path. And from there, it's very, very simple.
Yep. Similar for yourself, Richard?
Yeah, it's the same process, you know, regardless of, you know, what course that people are taking on. It's yeah, and as Steve commented, it doesn't cost anything. But for the employer's perspective, you know, they're receiving up to $7,000 per quarter, up to $28,000 from the 5th of October to the 30th of September next year. You know, it's a lot of money to support organisations and staff upskill, and it's a COVID wage subsidy relief. So it's really there to support companies during this transition period, and, you know, minus the cost of the course. You know, depending on the range of courses, but they can range from, you know, as low as $4,000 up to, you know, $15,000. But the total money that the employer would receive as a wage subsidy is greater and would offset any cost, subject to some, you know, specialised courses, the cost of the training. So, you know, there's no out of pocket really. I mean, although you're paid in arrears, you know, it's only a sort of a 3 to 4 month hold pattern before you're compensated for the cost of upskilling and you're receiving your wage subsidy.
Right. And for yourselves at Aviation Australia, David and Russell, you're only a phone call away?
Absolutely, Doug. Streamlined process, very easy. Just, yeah, it is just picking up the phone. We've got employment services here. We've got assessors here that we can provide info, even from a trade background. If someone's wanting to get into a certain trade, you know, talking aviation specific here, you know, we're all from certain trade backgrounds, certain company backgrounds and that. So guidance, info, pushing people forward, it's a piece of cake. It really is.
Fantastic. Look, on that note, look, I think we've wrapped up today's proceedings for the webinar. I'd like to thank yourself, Richard Brown, Brown's Professional, Steve Wyborn from Steve Wyborn Consulting, and David Moffat and Russell Quinn from Aviation Australia for taking the time out this afternoon to give our members and their associates a little bit more of an understanding of how simple and well, streamlined and easy the process of bringing on trainees and apprentices into their workplaces can be, and how important that these initiatives are going to be in 2021 in you know, bringing businesses back out into a prosperous post-COVID world. So thanks very much to all of you this afternoon, gentlemen. We really appreciate everyone from BNE Enterprise, very much appreciates the time you've taken out this afternoon. From here, I'm going to be putting a recording of the webinar up on our YouTube channel, and also going out to our webinar participants today with the FAQs that Steve and Richard were mentioning earlier in the webinar today. So if you do have any questions, as well as from Aviation Australia, of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to utilise those FAQs or get in touch with myself at info@bneenterprise.com. We're more than happy to forward your details on to Richard, Steve and David and Russell at any time, and you know, we only hope that there's an opportunity for some of our members to take up these amazing federal government incentives. So on that note, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming along. Very much appreciate your time, and we're wishing all of you a very safe and fun and happy Christmas and New Year period.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks,
No worries. Thanks very much, guys, and take care. Thanks very much to our listeners.
Thank you.
Bye.